Okay, thank you, Rosie. And welcome all to this slightly strange hybrid meeting of the Review and Scrutiny Commission. Can I just begin by asking for any apologies for absence? We've heard from Councillor Aidan Mundy. John, welcome as substitute for Aidan. Thank you. Yes, and welcome, Omar. Declaration is a... Thank you. Okay. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, we will go on to the minutes of our last meeting. Can I take those as agreed? Thank you. And if I go on to the main business for this evening and to welcome our guest, Borough Commander Liz Chappell. And I say, Liz, really nice to have you here in person. Is what I'm going to do, if I can ask you just to perhaps give us 3-4 minutes on what's been going on since you were last with us. I then want to take the stats, the crime stats, see if people have questions on those. And then I'm going to go through the questions to which you provided written answers, see if people want to follow up on any of those points. Okay, so if I can invite you to tell us what's been going on in your busy world, I'm sure, the last 6 months.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you very much for having me this evening, and a great pleasure to see many of you here tonight in the flesh too. Is everybody else muted?
Yeah. Go on.
So I think it's not muted. Okay, so we have a really good complement of officers now in Merton. So in the last few weeks, as you'll have seen in the press, we have needed to send officers to central London to help police the protests, for example, Extinction Rebellion. And whilst we all agree, I'm sure, that on the fact the cause is a very good one, of course, climate change, then we need to, in our policing roles, balance the interests of a lot of different parties, the communities in those areas and business holders and so on. So a lot of our officers have been policing those protests, which has meant that I know our communities have seen a reduction in, for example, the dedicated ward officers in their streets. So that activity has now finished, and we have a very good looking staffing position in Merton. So things that are on my mind, so I'm pleased that, and we'll come to the crime statistics shortly, that we're not seeing a big upturn from 2019 particularly, because in terms of the crime statistics, I look at both 2019 and 2020. So 2020 was such an unusual year. 2019 for most crime statistics is actually a better benchmark. So, but there are categories of offences that we are still keeping an eye on. So one of the places I've put resources at the moment is into schools. So we have obviously new pupils going back. The older secondary school children are potentially vulnerable to robbery as they go out and be independent. So we have more resources in and around schools. I'm also keeping my eye on any offences that affect violence against women and girls. As we've talked about in previous meetings, some of those offences that are affecting women, particularly domestic abuse, have stayed quite high, which is not a surprise because people have been needing to stay within their houses. And we've also seen an increase in mental health issues as well. And all of those things don't generate, thankfully, extra crimes all the time, but they do generate calls for service where we help vulnerable people. The other thing I'm keeping an eye on, and you may have read about it, and it's a national policing issue, but does also apply to Merton, is how many crimes we're solving. So that's what we call our sanction detection rate. And they're really low nationally, and it's a really complicated picture to try and understand exactly why that is and why there has been a decline in recent years. So obviously the statistics don't show the full picture, because we might have people that are diverted away from crime or given community resolutions, and they won't necessarily show up in the statistics. But of course, it doesn't explain all of it. So from a local perspective, one of the things I'm trying to work on is we don't have a very deeply experienced, in terms of years of experience, detective population at the moment, just because of the way that recruitment processes have worked over the last 5 years, say. So I've put into place extra coaching for our detectives to help increase those skills. And also one of our focus areas remains being on victim satisfaction, so we can keep victims with us on that journey, because that's the other thing we've suffered with over the COVID period. The criminal justice system has encountered a lot of issues, so cases have been delayed. And of course, what happens there, and particularly in offences that involve vulnerable people, is we lose their willingness to proceed when cases run into years to resolve. So, Chair, I think those are my opening remarks.
And overall, I must say, I noted that the crime levels are not rising, but as you say, the detection rate is low, and you've said something about that, which is helpful. Can I ask, is it also a problem getting a sufficient level of proof for the DPS to let you take a case forward to prosecution? I've not quite put that the right way around, but I'm sure you understand.
Yes. So yeah, we've been working with the Crown Prosecution Service on a lot of the issues facing the criminal justice system. So around the backlog of cases, but yes, also on what we call the full code test about whether cases progress. One of the issues that we've had is how much digital data do we need to look into. So that's particularly affecting crimes like sexual offences. And you'll know from the case of R versus Allen, that really looked at the privacy rights of victims and people associated with that case. And it's been I'd say a period of negotiation between us and the Crown Prosecution Service to get to what the right amount of detail is to prove a case, but yet not impinge on a person's privacy.
Yes, Omar.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Borough Commander, for the presentation and taking us through the statistics and the material that you provide us. One of the questions I had was in relation to the Merton Stop and Search reasons. They have drugs and the Misuse of Drugs Act labelled here, which is proportionally, which is majority of the reasons why people are being stopped. My question is that how many of these people are actually being charged, and do you have a percentage of that?
It's not a figure that I have to hand broken down in that way. So we talk about, excuse me, losing my voice, the number of positive outcomes for different categories, but there is actually an open source statistics page on the Met website where all those statistics are available. So I can certainly get that exact percentage and send it to you.
Yeah. If you could do that, would be brilliant, because I think it's such a vital number for us to know, especially where there is such a large number of people being stopped for that reason, to actually know whether that's just a bog standard reason to stop people or whether that's actually leading to people being charged. Because now, if only a small number of people are being charged, but majority of the time we're saying over 5,000 people are being stopped for that reason, then there's potentially a disconnect between the reason and the people actually being charged.
Yes, I completely understand the reasoning for the question. It's always around 20%, and actually the Misuse of Drugs Act, so the Section 23 stop and searches, are usually more intelligence driven, and you'll have seen in the press that we wouldn't now typically just stop people for a smell of cannabis, for example. There's usually some other piece of intelligence as well. Actually, the Section 1 stop and searches cover a much wider range of things that you can stop. So if there was to be a kind of catch-all type reason to stop, I would more expect it to see there and be under that one. But I may be able to, during the course of this meeting, bring that statistic up, because as I say, it is public access figure. Thank you.
On the graph here, that the younger group of people, 12 to 19, more of them are being stopped than the older age group. So no, I would have thought this 12 to 19 would be like something less crime than the older group. Am I right or wrong?
Thank you for the question about the age groups of people being stopped. So stop and search is essentially a street-based power. So it's not something where we go into people's homes and stop them. So what we've looked at for this is what we call the available street population, and it would typically be younger people who are out on the streets and who are sadly involved in drug activity and things like that. So it's not just Merton. The picture is across London, and I do know that. It's really difficult, and we have to be really careful when we're stopping and searching juveniles, because we certainly wouldn't want to give them a bad experience with police officers for they're going into their adult life. But it's mostly to do with who's out on the streets at any given time.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from what you were saying, just to clarify there, that number of positive outcomes for drugs stop and searches is around 20%, you were saying. Is there any movement on that number over time? And are you pleased with how that compares with other boroughs? Also noting, I have no context for this, so it looks to be a worryingly high number of weapons or blades stops and searches there as well. I'm hoping that the positive outcomes, i.e. finding weapons on people in Merton, is quite low. Do you have any idea of a rough percentage of what you would call positive outcomes on that? And then my secondary question kind of links on to some of the questions that you've had more detail on in the kind of written answers you've got. But from my point of view, the neighbourhood policing side of things and what you were saying about your detective experience, could you summarise how well known some of these people who are carrying weapons are, and whether you're pleased with kind of your organisation's knowledge of who might have weapons and who might not? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so there's quite a few bits there. I think I've just tried to bring up the stop and search data dashboard, and for some reason it's corrupted at the moment, so I'll return to that in a minute. I think for those kind of questions, I probably won't ever, unfortunately, be able to answer on the specific detail of those different percentages unless I'm equipped to kind of bring that in advance. So apologies for that, and it's certainly information I can provide to the committee outside the meeting. In terms of the carrying of knives, it is something that has become a very difficult cultural issue, and so there's been lots of government-led campaigns and mayoral-led campaigns which you'll have seen about saving lives and not carrying knives and various other things. And also we're going into schools and doing lots of education around it, and we have some very well used knife bins weapon bins where people can come and drop those off. So we are seeing over the last few years an increase in in knife carrying. Thankfully, we're seeing a decrease though in guns, which is good. But it is something that we just constantly need to educate on. I mean, it's something that actually first came to our attention as a very difficult issue from some of the surgeons in London's hospitals who are seeing, you know, an increasing level of injuries in young people. So it is increasing. In terms of the question you asked me about whether I'm happy with where we sit in terms of positive outcomes on stop and search compared to other places, yes, very much so. It compares very favourably. And that statistic, I can't give you the precise figures without the dashboard, but it has started to creep up a little bit in terms of positive outcome, as we require our officers to have more detailed and varied grounds for stop and search, because as you'll know, the only stop and searches we can do without grounds are the section 60s, which is the subject of one of the questions that was submitted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for a very interesting report. Can I just drill down a bit more into what Councillor Bush and Councillor Butler said about, asked you about the outcomes? Presumably judging the quality of your stop and searching is all about mirroring up or looking at the positive outcomes compared to the number of searches. So do you do that at an officer level, at a team level, at a station level, or all of those? Because I think for our purposes, it's absolutely critical to see the outcomes, and just seeing the bald figures of how many, the reasons, it doesn't give us the real picture.
Yes, so we do.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we do take it down to team level now and individual level. So all of that data is available for us, not just on stop and search, on other categories of data as well. I think that's important because it can sometimes show us if there are any cultural issues, and it's something that gets looked at by the stop and search scrutiny committees as well. So the members of the public that come in and look at what we're doing. So I would expect, and this is checked up on, that the inspectors for each team are looking at their team to see if there's any discrepancies in the data. And I'm also going to just put the link in the chat function to the dashboard that I've been talking about, that drills down to borough level and then very specifically on the data. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In one of your strategic priority number 1, which is the volume of burglaries and robberies, it's saying here that personal robbery was down 6%, and burglary down 46%. Is this a similar pattern across London, or are there other patterns that you're seeing in Merton particularly? And perhaps is there anything that you would be proud of kind of telling us about stories within your command, and how your teams are working to decrease those? Thank you.
So burglary doesn't feature in my own overriding focus areas, other than how many burglaries we detect, because I want to make sure that victims of burglary get the best service they can. However, where burglary does feature extremely heavily is in the priorities that are agreed by the public at ward level. So but I in the past, and I'd expect to see in the ward panel agreements that are just being made at the moment, burglary featuring very heavily. The pattern across London is that, and it's exactly as you'd expect given where we've been. So in central London, offence numbers have been dropping more quickly than in other areas. However, things like burglary have been dropping quite quickly in outer boroughs such as ours in Merton, because people simply have been at home more. So what I'm seeing now, which is something I'm keeping an eye on, and I have the latest figure here, is that over the last month, Merton has seen a 24.5% increase in burglary, in the last month, and that is as people start to leave their homes and go back into workplaces. So we're renewing our efforts in terms of both our dedicated ward officers going around and visually looking at for any vulnerabilities on premises, to also doing a lot of crime prevention in terms of leafleting. So that is something we're keeping an eye on, and it's very traditional seasonal crime for this time of year.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Borough Commander, for your report. On the statistics about the stop and search by demographic, the bar charts here on ethnicity show, I think, if my calculations are correct, that that black and or stop and search on black and Asian people makes up 51% of the searches. And if you include other, which I don't know what that is, but I presume it's not white, seeing as that's already characterised, that goes up to 55%. And the most recent data I could find about Merton's population is that 37% of Merton's population is categorised, broadly as BAME. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about why that might be, or could provide any context around that. Thank you.
Yes, so we know that we don't have the latest population data, do we? So we know that 2011 was the last cut of the data, and that imminently, hopefully, we'll get a new recut of that data, which I think will help us, ask these questions. That said, I do believe there is a ongoing disproportionality in terms of the demographic of people that we're stopping. And I think that it's a societal and community cohesion issue as well as a policing issue. So questions are rightly being asked of policing in terms of whether we have any inherent biases when we're stopping people, but also we're trying to do work with communities, because the intelligence that we get in is often so desperately general that people would just the most the thing that people notice first about another person quite often in a difficult situation is the colour of their skin. And all that has to happen is you have the colour of someone's skin, and perhaps say they were wearing a black hooded top or something like that, and that can immediately, unfortunately, be a lot of people. And then there's no way often for officers to be able to take it down a level of detail further. So if someone has that skin type, is wearing something that's been described, which could be quite generic, because most young people wear black, don't they, or and they're in the area, then we have a duty, particularly with serious crime, to stop someone. So it's about educating the public as well in terms of the things that they notice about other people. But I think it's something that we'll just need to keep working on.
Thanks, Chair. And Borough Commander.
I actually have two questions. The first one is in relation to the Merton Daily Dashboard, which states that knife crime is reducing. What more can the council do, and what more can your team do to further reduce that number? Because that's still a very high number, and I could imagine that a lot of those numbers are linked to that increased, the demographic chart, which shows the 15 to 19-year-olds being the largest age group that are kind of being affected by this. So it'd be interesting to find out what can be done, and also what the breakdown is of that number per the age group.
So in terms of what more can be done on knife crime particularly, there is a really good multi-agency response on that. So, Kieran and others on the call have been very heavily involved in, as I say, really looking at what we can do to prevent, as well as obviously dealing with the traditional police role of being reactive to any issues. So that's included work from lighting particular areas to the education in schools, to taking that down to primary school level where people are vulnerable, and we traditionally have fewer police officers there, to working with other bodies like Fearless and Crime Stoppers, and places that we know people will pass intelligence to if they don't have the confidence to pass it to police. So there's a whole range of things we're doing. And I think what the council can do and is doing is just to be really consistent on that, because I think the violent crime affecting our young people that we have in Merton is thankfully really low compared to a lot of other areas in London. And I wouldn't want that to generate any kind of complacency. I think through being consistent about that, then we'll get the best results. And I talked earlier about, the fact that we're waiting outside school gates and things like that. There are a few more also specialist crime operations that are due to happen again. So there was the very successful Operachi County Lines piece of work that took some drug lines out of Merton, as well as other places. So we're going to be doing that kind of thing again. So really taking out the levers for that violence, because the violence isn't in a vacuum. It's typically related to drugs or some other money-making scheme. And you asked me a question about statistics, sorry. Yes, I mean we can. I don't have it with me, but I can get that. It follows a curve as you'd expect. So it is, as you say, it's the people who are just approaching adulthood, but we are seeing an increasing number of crimes that are affecting people as young as 12, which is why it's really clear to us that we need to go into primary schools and do the work there.
The only reason why I asked the question about the breakdown of the age range, because I don't think that number gives us an entire full picture. So even though the numbers may be decreasing, I want to know whether between 17 to 19-year-olds, it's actually increasing. It's just decreasing in all the other age groups.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and so our youth offender teams would know all of the detail of that and work to that demographic, and I'll make sure that I bring that next time.
Thank you. Two quick questions. You mentioned the sort of more imaginative policing solutions, such as community resolutions, are not being picked up in the statistics as crimes that have been solved or dealt with. Is there not a way of solving that? Because that would be a huge sort of anchor on that sort of approach, unless we do show that in the statistics. And secondly, just on these search volumes by demographic, just check we know what we're looking at here. We're all assuming the first page is absolute numbers, although it's headed volume as per 1,000 population. The second one, positive outcomes, clearly isn't absolute numbers. It's figures to 3 decimal points, I think, if my eyes are correct. Do you know exactly what these are showing us and whether the headings are right or not? Because I'm not sure we know what we're looking at the moment. Well, there can be 28,000 positive outcomes, can there? In 12 months. 28,000. When there's only been. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Right. So on the what is a positive outcome point, I think in an ideal world it would be good for us to have details of all of that, but unfortunately at the moment there's no way of capturing all of the range of outcomes. So we have on our crime system, we have different outcome codes, but it's not as nuanced as I'd like it to be. But as you'd expect, in a public sector organisation, investment in information technology is not always forthcoming. That said, we are going forward within the next few months going to start to use the Connect IT system, which is something that the counties use, which I think is going to work really well for us, because essentially what that will do is it will it will take a person and then it will pull out all information relating to that person to give us a fuller picture of how we're working with that person. And I think with that, it's going to give us more opportunity to look at investment in alternative ways of resolving things. I mentioned it because I wanted to explain that a statistic, is just one figure, and it's a bit more complex than that, but it's not a high enough number of good things that are happening that would bump up that detection rate in any meaningful, statistically meaningful way. And I wouldn't want to pretend that it does. So I hope that we can work towards that greater level of nuance and indeed more investment in prevention. On the statistics point, I'm sorry, I didn't quite. So
Oh, I see. It's just the. Well, I pressed the right button, right? It's just the figures are so high on the positive outcomes, but Billy said it might be because it's the whole BCU.
Yeah.
Oh, so these are absolute numbers we're looking at on both these pages.
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
And I think given the level of interest in this particular topic, which I must admit didn't kind of come through from the questions that I was asked in advance, I think it might be helpful for a future meeting to present this data in a more detailed way so we can have a more structured discussion about it.
I think we should now move on to the questions that were submitted.
Yes, of course. So that was, as you say, because it just happened, the one I wasn't able to submit in advance. So it was a mostly positive picture. I certainly wouldn't want to overstate it because there are a number of, for example, licensing issues that we will be working through with the appropriate parties. Some things from a kind of public safety and vulnerability perspective didn't go quite as well as we would want and we think could go better. But I won't dwell on that in this forum because I know people have multiple roles. But from a crime perspective, fairly smooth, very smooth. So I spoke to what we term the bronze commander, who's the person who's responsible for the public order policing on that weekend. And he reported to me that there was around 7,000 people each day. The Saturday, I think it was a slightly older demographic of people who attended, was very trouble-free. There was one arrest for a fray, but it was on the periphery, right? So you couldn't absolutely say it was attributed to that event, and one community resolution for drugs. On the Sunday, there were 2 arrests, one for a drugs supply offences and one for a common assault, which was on one of the stewards there. But with there was also an allegation of a sexual assault in the queuing area. But for that number of people, licensing issues aside, we were happy from a policing perspective with the safety of the outcome of that event.
Sorry, the numbers were less than the numbers licensed for, weren't they? Am I right?
Yes, they were.
Yes.
They went down from 9,000 or just under 10,000 to 8,000 for both days.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, just to be clear on that. So the sort of things that worried us 2 years ago, it would seem were absent. No stabbings, no violent assaults. Yeah. Okay.
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah. Because at the time of the licensing hearing, I do recall you opposed the granting of the license. Would you view this differently now if it comes back again for another year?
I'm not sure it's a question that you might want to go into in this forum.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think one of us needs to go on mute. But we do have licensing concerns, which I have a detailed page that has been sent to me that we would want to work through. I think, you know, with some adjustments, then, you know, hopefully further things will be possible. But there are some undertakings perhaps that were made that weren't followed through on that we would want to further discuss.
Okay. Nick, I mean, although there are a lot of questions here, I think they come from just 4 members, in fact. Rather than go through each of the ones you've got down in detail, are there any points you want to pick up with the Borough Commander? Your questions numbers 6
through to 13. No, I think they've all been answered very well. Thank you very much for that, Borough Commander. Obviously, the one that we're always constantly concerned about is question number 6, of course, is the future of Wimbledon Police Station. And there is, operationally, though, it's looking much better and safer.
And Sally, can I ask you? You had some written questions there. Are you happy with the answers as given? Yeah. Yeah. Please.
I have a question in relation to the clusters and the 3 priorities. In the answers, it mentions that we'll be having 1 priority for violence and then 2 for local. But if a ward doesn't have a high rate of violence, does that mean that there's a 3rd opportunity for us to focus on what is in particular that local ward being missed?
This is probably one of the areas where my personal view diverges from the corporate view. It's been subject to discussions between the mayor and the commissioner. So you know, bearing down on is the phrase used, and eradicating violence is the commissioner's top priority for London. And that's, of course, because what she's talking about is reducing the highest harm to people in London and having London be a safe city. We are, you know, thankfully, you know, there's 4 boroughs within the BCE, particularly 3 of them. They're incredibly safe, and the high harm only affects a very small number of people. But what I mean, it comes back to okay. So to answer the question, I believe that in an ideal world there would be an opportunity for a ward to come up with exactly the things that matter to them. But there's also a piece around, you know, we spent some time talking about youth violence and our worries around that. My concern would be that if we don't allocate resources to at least preventing violence, then we may see the figures go in the wrong direction. You know, we typically find that, you know, police professionals, for example, would be very worried about violence when it impacts, thankfully, only a very small number of people in a particular ward. And communities are much more worried about things that do impact on them, such as having their catalytic converter taken, or being knocked over by an e-scooter, or being burgled, and those types of things. So that's why we in the Southwest, we really strongly argued for at least 2 to be things that the community truly decides. But the Met overall corporate objective is to reduce violence, and that's why, and the mayor's as well, and that's why it's name checked here.
Thank you.
Thank you for the answers. On Wimbledon Police Station, you know, it's great to hear it's not about to close, and you've seen indications of a desire to keep it. But it's 3 years now since my court case, and Wimbledon Police Station is suffering from planning blight. You're rightly not investing in it at the moment because you don't know whether you're going to keep it. So we need to know, don't we? Is that message getting through to MOPAC?
My understanding from things I've heard today is that MOPAC will shortly be opening discussions to understand the strength of feeling around the Merton and other borough estates. So it seems more likely than not, from things I've seen, that conversations will now start to come to a head. And as I say, I just have to come back to the fact I've not heard in any forum at any time recently that we're in danger of losing Wimbledon Police Station. But I, like you, would like that to be confirmed as well.
So unless members have further questions for the Borough Commander, I'm going to thank you for coming along this evening. Particularly appreciated. An example I hope that our other officers will take on board. And yeah, it's been a good session. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. And I will bring more statistics on stop and search for the Councillor Bush and others who would like them.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm very pleased to hear that it was a better experience for residents. Yes, I have about 6 or 8 concerns that the licensing team has passed to me, and we'll make sure that that meeting happens. Yeah.
So we move on to our next item from. Yeah. No, I was keeping an eye on it. Okay. Yes. Let's bring in. Bit of a hush, please, people. If we can bring in Kieran now, to give us the report from Safer Merton. Kieran, if you just a summary of what's been going on, and then I'm sure we're going to have a number of questions for you. Off you go.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So the report that I've presented outlines the work of Safer Merton, and it has a focus on violence against women and girls as well. So in summary, and I have tried to summarise the breadth of work that we do because it is quite broad, but at 1.1, I've provided a table of the 7 service delivery objectives of the team that I manage. And, you know, the key to the work that we do is one is around delivering on our statutory duty under the Crime and Disorder Act, and that's around us running the Community Safety Partnership, carrying out an annual strategic crime needs assessment, making sure the borough's got a community safety plan in place, and there's coordinated approach around the various parts of crime and antisocial behaviour. You know, I've pointed out at number 2, we always try to make sure that we reflect local, regional and national policy and good practice, and that we also keep up to date with any statutory requirements. So, for example, this year we've had the Domestic Abuse Act that's come into force. The Home Office have released their Beating Crime Plan and the new Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. So it's areas like that what we would look at to see and ensure that Merton is in line with some of that national policy and strategy as well. Towards the end of the year, the Mayor of London will be issuing a London crime reduction plan, so we're all waiting for that. I've been told that it's imminent, and again we will do a sort of double check process to ensure that our approach is in line with that, but also there's a clear balance that we are meeting the needs of our local community and the crime and ASB that affects us locally as well. And at 3, I've sort of highlighted, and throughout the report, I've split these 7 sections in and given you a lot more detail under each one. So the 3rd delivery objective we've got is around responding to violence against women and girls. So my officers coordinate that work across the partnership. We have a strategic board, we have an annual delivery plan, and I know that in the past we've provided you with some detailed updates around our work around VOG as well. So that's further detailed in the report as well. In terms of antisocial behaviour, that's another one of our priorities. Again, I've detailed in the report how we go about doing that in terms of looking at the particular areas and localities in the borough where there's persistent antisocial behaviour, through the localities board, our direct support to victims as well. And you'll see from the data that I've provided, we have seen a substantial increase in the reports that the council and indeed my team are receiving around antisocial behaviour. A lot of that is the effects of COVID, and obviously the increase is continuing post-COVID as well. I've set out how the team, but also how the Community Safety Partnership support the Council's broader ambition on building community resilience and cohesion. And the key ways that we deliver on that is obviously we coordinate the Neighbourhood Watch programme across the borough. We coordinate the hate crime approach and the hate crime strategy across the borough. We've got a hate crime steering group in place, and we support the Merton Safer Neighbourhood Board. And again, I've provided more detail about that in the report. The sixth service objective that we've got is around our partnership response to violence, and Liz touched on that briefly. So we coordinated and pulled together early part of, I think, this year, and reviewed it last year. We transitioned the knife crime plan into a broader violence reduction plan, which has a number of activities underneath that as well. The headline around that is that, you know, the template and the sort of framework for that is provided to us by the London Violence Reduction Unit. The plan is available and we're happy to share that. It's been assessed independently by the Violence Reduction Unit, and I've highlighted in the report the areas that are covered in that plan and the response that we've had back. We've had a fairly good response back from the Violence Reduction Unit around the work that we're doing. And last but not least, it's my team that delivers on the borough-wide CCTV service. And the key point around that is that, you know, we've got at least 213 cameras across the borough, and the service runs 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And over the next 2 years, we're going to be looking at doing an upgrade of the borough-wide CCTV service, and that's an upgrade on of the cameras and the network that the council have invested in. I've also highlighted in the report how we as a partnership, the statutory partnership, every year reviews its priorities. To do that, we do conduct a sort of in-depth analysis of the data for our borough. We consult with partners, we look at what our residents have told us, and we go back to the Community Safety Board and make some recommendations, and you'll see them set out at 2.3 of this report. That sets out the 6 strategic objectives for the partnership. And you know, just for information, the members on the partnership are the council, the police, probation, voluntary sector, public health. So it's a well-rounded partnership. You can see they've identified 6 objectives that the partnership will work on moving forward. The other key thing I'd just like to mention in the report as well is it's listed in some detail in table 3. That's at 2.7 of the report. So my team also looks to see how we can secure funding in the borough from various sources. So just for VORG, you can see there's a number of bids and funding that's been made available through various sources. The Ministry for Housing and Communities Local Government, or MOPAC, or Home Office. So wherever there's an opportunity, we do pull together bids and submit bids, and you can see in that table where we've been successful and unsuccessful as well. And that's just for the area of VORG, but you'll see throughout the report I've dotted various bids that we've put in. For example, with violence, we've secured £5,000 so that if there's an incident on the borough, we're able to extend the Fearless campaign that we've done in response to that. We're able to get deployable cameras in as well. So I think I've highlighted the key points throughout the report. Happy to take any questions. Chair.
Which I found interesting. There's 2 points. One was on the matter you were just talking about, table 3, with your bids. I note that you are successful, and congratulations for being successful on those ones. But I note they tend to be for the smaller amounts rather than the larger amounts. And I wondered if you thought there was any sort of link with that, that it's easier to get smaller amounts of funding than the larger ones. But also, do you write your own bids for this, or do you employ someone in particular to do them? It's just, you're doing well with it, but it would be nice to get some of the larger sums of money. And equally, about the CCTV, it appears to be growing and very thorough, and I have seen the room from where you operate. But my concern is about mobile CCTV, and are you working to increase that? Because there have been occasions when councillors have asked for mobile CCTV just for perhaps for short term, for particular speeding issues, motorbike racing and fly tipping. So those are my, are you trying to get more? Those are my two questions, thank you.
Sure, thank you. So in terms of writing bids, we do write our own bids. Sometimes we collaborate with our colleagues in other boroughs, Wandsworth, Kingston, and we write them together, or sometimes they will take the lead. So for example, you know that we've got a IDFA service, which is a cross-borough service with Wandsworth, Kingston and Richmond. It's a service that runs across the 4 boroughs. And one of the other boroughs, Wandsworth, took the lead in that, I believe. I may be wrong. I think it's Wandsworth took the lead in that, and they've received the money for that. So yes, we do write our own bids. We don't use external consultants to do that. However, if there was an element, you know, usually we have got the expertise within the team or across the partnership in most of these areas, so we're able to draft those bids. The second question was around the smaller amounts, and you are right, because for example, with the Safer Streets Round 3 funding, sometimes the Home Office gives a large amount of money to MOPAC and MOPAC other gatekeepers, so we're bidding against 32 other London boroughs, and depending on the criteria of the bid, for example, Merton in terms of figures may come quite low down because we've got a low level of rates around those particular crimes compared to other boroughs. So Safer Streets Round, I think it's 1 or 2 focused on burglary, so they would have there were 3 bids that were going to be put forward across London, and you know they would have been focused more on the boroughs with the highest number of offences as well. We've got a bid in trail at the moment as well around the nighttime economy and looking at the safety of women. Again, that's been an effort across three or 4 boroughs where we're looking at collaborating across the boroughs so that we can secure a larger sum of money, but we are competing against 32 other London boroughs. We find that when we do collaborate with other boroughs, we end up, you know, it does draw a bit more attention than us going in on our own. Sorry, and if I could just mention as well, some of the smaller amounts, like for example, the Domestic Abuse Act, the 35,000, they're bids that every borough gets offered. So every borough has been offered at least £30,000 to support them in delivering on the Domestic Abuse Act. So you might find some of the smaller pots of money like the VRU, their funding that's given to every borough, but we still have to put forward a sort of a programme or a project and some outcomes as to how we're going to spend that money. In terms of your question for mobile CCTV, yes, absolutely. Our focus would be to increase that resource. We have around 13 cameras across the borough at the moment, and we're always looking to see how we can expand that and looking at different models that we can use. So at the moment, we're in discussion with a number of companies around coming into our borough and running some pilots around the borough, so we can secure at least another 13 cameras. But you know, I absolutely agree with you. We are looking at increasing our capacity around mobile cameras. Are a lot easier, obviously, to put in and a lot flexible, because all our static cameras, we can't move them around. I hope that answers your questions. Sorry, Chair, you're on mute. I said the famous words.
All right. Councillor McCabe, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Borough Commander touched on this briefly, and it prompted me to ask the question whether she said that there is a problem with people being run over by e-scooters, and I wonder if that's your experience and whether this is becoming a problem. It is my experience that I'm seeing more and more of these vehicles being ridden recklessly on pavements, in the road, without helmets, by kids who don't have the maturity and the judgment to drive a vehicle that can go at that speed. I understand the police have concerns about them being used for acquisitive crime, in particular snatching of bags and so on from pedestrians who don't hear them coming up behind them. And I have a sense that many of the people who are breaking the law by riding them don't know what the law is. And I think there's enormous confusion about this issue, because you are legally able to ride them in certain parts of London if you have hired them from one of the pilot schemes, but you could cross the road and you could be, we all know that within London there are many roads where one side of the road is in one borough and one in another. I think many people are in ignorance of the law, and I think there is a need for some sort of public information campaign. And I wonder whether the people that are selling these items should be advised that they are not legal unless they're being used on private land, and they shouldn't sell them without passing that information on to the people purchasing them.
So directly in terms of my team, we haven't seen a high level of reports around that. We've had a few as part of nuisance and antisocial behaviour, and that's fine, because a lot of these reports potentially would go to the police, as you said, given the kind of incidences that they're involved in. I think your point around the shops and them providing that advice around the e-scooters, I think that's something potentially that could be looked at with trading standards, but it's always within the remit of what our statutory duties are, or how much we can push on that. So it hasn't really come to our attention as much. I think the thing that comes to our attention a lot more is the Deliveroo and the Uber sort of collection motorbike, and how they park in particular parts of the borough, as opposed to the e-scooters.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, are we good? Yeah. Thank you, Kieran, for your report. I have a question just around how we measure the success of our CCTV operation. So in a neighbouring ward to my own, there's a bridge that goes over a railway line, and one side of the bridge is in Merton, the other side is in Wandsworth. But the bridge is used frequently. It sort of links kind of Colliers Wood residential areas through to the sort of Tooting area. And there were a large number of reports of kind of antisocial behaviour, or also of people behaving in an intimidating way towards women, young women especially. And so a little while ago, Merton, on the Merton side of the bridge, put up a CCTV camera, and it was, quite a obvious camera. It wasn't a hidden one, and it had the desired effect. Reports of antisocial behaviour or intimidating behaviour significantly decreased. I know anecdotally, young female friends of mine who used the bridge felt safer going over it. And so obviously the reports of these incidents dropped, and then the camera has now been taken away. And now that the camera's gone, anecdotally, I know that there are, the reports are increasing of that exact same behaviour coming back and occurring again. And I know that people are starting to feel unsafe using the bridge, particularly at night. So I suppose I'm asking, how do we measure the success of our CCTV operation? Is it through the number of incidents that the cameras do catch, or is it, on a more broadly, do we measure the success of having cameras somewhere and the very fact of the camera being there reducing reports of potentially criminal behaviour? Thank you.
Thank you. So success can be measured in a number of ways. So if I start with, if we've got 213 cameras across the borough, success could mean, that they're all operating effectively, that downtime is minimal, and we get them back up and running as soon as possible. That would be a success to ensure that they're all operating. We have provided a chart in the report just to show the incidences that have been captured. Success for us would also mean our sort of positive liaison with the police when there's particular incidences, and having some convictions that come out of that, some arrests that come out of that. I know that we've sort of promoted, I think it was last year, some positive successes as well in the Wimbledon area, where our operators work closely with the police, through an incident around robbery. There was another one around bicycle theft, etc. So we would measure success in that way as well, to look to see, has the evidence that we've collected actually supported a prosecution or arrest, or liaison with the police. Inevitably, when a camera goes up, you're absolutely right, it does increase the level of safety that individuals would feel. It's a difficult, and it's a fine line there really, because it's around how many cameras do you put around the borough before you get into that big brother type mode. And for us, if we've put, from the example that you've given us, we've got we've got two different types of cameras. We've got obviously the fixed cameras, and they're sort of either hardwired or with fibre. They cost quite a lot to put in. So currently we've got them all around the borough. Our upgrade programme is looking at upgrading the existing ones. And also as part of that, we are going to audit all those cameras and have a look at which ones have actually been effective, which ones have had zero recording. It could be that they're not effective where they are anymore because the design and the landscape around them have changed. So the idea is that we would audit, and this usually happens once every 10 years when local authorities look at upgrading their system. So we've had our system over 10, some of our cameras are 20 years old. So this is a real opportunity for us to look at where those cameras are, which ones are effective, and look at areas like you've just mentioned, which may need a more permanent camera. So we would look at the movement of the existing assets that we've got. To top that up, as you know, we've got our mobile cameras, and mobile really does mean mobile, meaning that we'd put them in for 3 to 6 months to get the desired effect. Hopefully the objective is to catch and convict or capture the evidence of who's doing that, so that we can pursue that. Sometimes that's not all the case that happens. Sometimes they do it out of view of the camera. Most importantly, what you mentioned is that everybody knows the camera's there. So legally, with every camera we put up, it's not covert, it's not undercover, it's overt surveillance. We have to put a signage up to say that there's a camera there. If we don't put the signage up, then we've got to complete something called RIPA and justify why we're putting an undercover camera there. So when we put the camera up in a particular 9 out of 10 times, we'll find that the problem may move down the road or further down. So we're ending up just playing catch up. So really, it's just a combination of things as well. So the example that you've just given, we would absolutely look at that again and review and have a look at, are there any other things that we should be doing as a partnership to tackle that? Is the camera the resolution for that? Is it something else that we need to do in terms of our engagement with the local community to capture who's doing it, why they're doing it, and looking at, maybe trying to problem solve it a little bit wider than just relying on the mobile cameras alone. I hope I've answered your question, but success is quite varied in the way that we measure it with CCTV.
Councillor McLean, actually, because you were looking puzzled.
Yeah, Karen, can I just go back to what you just said about the audit? Are we saying, first of all, can you just confirm how many static cameras we have in the borough?
212.
So 212,
roughly.
And you're saying that those cameras have not been audited, 212 in over 10 years?
No. What I mean audited, that's sorry about my terminology. They've obviously been maintained. They've been, they're regularly monitored. They have proactive and reactive maintenance. When I say audited, as part of this upgrade and network, we're going to be looking across our cameras to have a look at, are our cameras in the right locations? For that, we'll look at the last maybe 3 to 5 years of crime and ASB data. And it's not to say that cameras haven't been moved or there haven't been new cameras that have been put up, but this upgrade provides us an opportunity of having a thorough look to see, are there particular areas in the borough, for example, which are blind spots where we think we could have additionality of cameras, and are there cameras, for example, that are no longer needed because, I don't know, there's been some development, etc. Usually we do this as we go along anyway, but it's always good practice with a thorough upgrade like this across the borough that we would do that. And it is quite a large upgrade. It's a 1.2 million investment that the council have put in to conduct this. So again, we will follow an evidence-based approach. We would look at our statistics, and things change, you know, over 10 years, things may change. We may have different types of crime that are taking place in different areas. It may be that we need more cameras in particular areas. And if that is the case, then obviously we'd look into see how we can secure funding to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Kieran, for your very detailed report. I'm actually going to refer back to a previous question one of my other council colleagues asked earlier in regards to the funding bids. My question was more in relation to how many other funds are there that we've not submitted bids to, and do we know the values of those bids that we've potentially lost?
So I would say that, you know, every funding opportunity that we get, we mostly apply for those bids. Top of my head, I couldn't tell you the ones that we haven't, but if I could just be a bit of a health warning here as well, because some of the bids, obviously, it's been quite a busy year politically in terms of elections, in terms of new strategies, and in terms of funding. So last year we had quite a number of large bids where, for example, boroughs were asked to bid, you know, quite quickly, spend the money by the end of the financial year. So literally 6 months of spending that. And the challenge we have, for example, is if we put in hypothetically a large bid, we then have to go out and procure that service. For example, the Perpetrators Fund. Merton doesn't have a perpetrators program for domestic violence. We don't have a service provider. So it would be quite difficult and a challenge for us to put in a bid, have a large sum of money for 6 months, but then very quickly commission a provider to come in. So we have had, and that's when we look at collaboration across other boroughs. So, you know, we know that another borough has got a service. Can we dovetail? Can we recommission through them? So we have all these conversations first and foremost. And it isn't just about securing the funding, it's about, can we deliver on our commitments for that funding as well. So I'm sorry, Councillor, if I haven't answered your question around how many we haven't bid for. I have to say, you know, everyone that comes across my table or desk, we proactively, we put in whatever we can that's relevant for us.
Thank you, Kieran. I think that kind of answers my question. The only other thing is just, are we able to foreshadow, if we know that there is a large bid and that Merton would benefit from that bid in the long term, whether it's 6 months and 12 months, whether we're in a place, especially kind of looking forward over the next 12 months, to make sure that if we know a certain large bid or fund is going to come available, that we position ourselves so that we're best placed to potentially win that. I'm sure you're doing that anyway, Kieran, but I think it's just an extra just added note.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the table right at the bottom, I referenced the domestic abuse perpetrator program. The bid came out in June 2021, and we did quickly, within 2-3 weeks, collaborate. We had lots of evening meetings. We pulled the bid together, and, you know, our stance always is to try to put the bid in, you know, for whatever it is that we can, to secure whatever we can to deliver that. So yeah, we absolutely do that. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Kieran, for an excellent report. For 3 quick questions. Are you constrained by the way we define your success? Safety, you know, making Merton safe is all about making it safe rather than number of convictions. I'm struck by Billy's example of a camera that worked being removed because people had stopped acting criminally on the bridge. I also remember how we lost what we used to call cumulative impact zone in the village because it had worked. Sometimes we want to retain things because they're working, and we don't, and if you're only defining success narrowly via the number of convictions or the number of problems, I don't think that helps you or helps us. Secondly, you mentioned Deliveroo, which provides us a service. I suspect there's no one in this room who's not used Deliveroo at some point over the pandemic, and yet my inbox is full of people rightly complaining about the antisocial activities of some of the riders. Does Merton have a strategy on that? And thirdly, on your commendable work on violence against women and girls, how are you going to sort of monitor the success rate of these strategies? Thank you.
Sorry, I was just jotting down the questions. So the first one around success, I would tend to agree with you. It's not really just around convictions and orders and enforcement for us, because there's a lot of preventative things that we do as well. So for example, there could be a case of antisocial behaviour where we haven't had to take out a community protection warning because some of our other interventions have worked. So I think you're right. We do success for us is extremely broad. It could be the reduction of repeat victims coming to our service, and it also could be an increase in reports. So we want to see people come to us more around hate crime, more around domestic violence. So one could look at those figures to think, are we poor performing because we've got an increase in domestic violence reports, or are we performing well because we've pushed the message out there and raised awareness and encouraged people to report incidences as well? So your point, councillor, is taken, and there is a broad category of things that we can use to demonstrate our success. The second one around Deliveroo, obviously we're very supportive of all the businesses post-COVID as well. I think the challenge here is obviously it's a new arena over the last 12 to 18 months that's picked up, and the number of the mode of transport and the mode of delivery. And I think, with the council, we're looking at that carefully across highways and across parking, across the police, because I think some of this falls between some of the legislation that we've got, whether it's parking enforcement. If we've got areas in town centres which are, you can park for 20 minutes, they can park for 20 minutes, a motorised vehicle, and there's no distinguish between whether it's a car or a motorbike. So we are working with, I know Wimbledon specifically have got an issue. We have got a task and finish group set up, and we are looking to see how we can resolve that. I think it's not just a Merton problem. There's a few emails going around across London as to how our local authorities looking at this, and I think there is a balance, because we don't want to put individuals out of business, out of work. They're doing a service, but we just want that balance of how can it operate safely without the nuisance in some of our town centres, and not impact on maybe some of the limited parking that's there for shoppers, etc., to park up. So I think it'll be an ongoing thing, councillor, that we need to problem solve with colleagues and the business sector as well. I hope that answers the first two questions. In terms of violence against women and girls and monitoring success with some of our strategies, for us, success, again, it is broad. What we want to see is more and more victims coming to us for help. We want them to come quite early on, before things escalate to a critical point. We want them to come to us early on, before it gets to a point where there's issues around children's safeguarding or some serious harm. Many of you are aware from previous reports, we've got 2 domestic violence homicide reviews being conducted in the borough as well. So it's not about numbers, even those 2, there were extremely serious incidences. We're reviewing, those cases at the moment, which we have to do statutorily. Some of our success will be around us, the amount, the volume of individuals that we support and how we turn their lives around and get them into stable housing, or reduce the violence against them, but also bring perpetrators to justice as well. So there's a number of ways with VORG that we would measure success. Ultimately, it's a very broad strategy, and for us, I can say that we've got that in place. We have to have a very coherent delivery plan in place for that strategy, so it's not something that sits and gathers dust on a shelf. We have to have very clear outcomes and outputs from the outset. And my team obviously coordinates that through the VORG strategic board. It gets signed off, and we ensure that, we are quarterly looking at what have we delivered for each of those objectives and those outcomes. And are we able to come to you at the end of the year to say, like we've done previously, this is what we've done in terms of the delivery of the strategy, and here's some of our evidence in terms of how we've delivered that.
The TV issue again. So I was standing at one of our hot spots, we call it Fly Tipped in Graveney, and there were 2 beds, old beds, the mattresses, the base, chest of drawers, everything were dumped right there. And just as I was searching to see if I could find an address in any sort, Veolia's van rolled up. And apparently it was reported before I got to it. So the driver said to me, do you know it costs more to call us out every time to pick up your fly tipping? It costs us more than if you had installed a camera just across the street. So he said, every time we come to pick up, we way over £100 than it's cost you. It's CCTV is a lot cheaper. So the question I want to ask is, as the cost of picking up your fly tips as compared to CCTV, is it cheaper? Cost you less in installing the cameras rather than just calling out the Veolia every time there's a fly tip?
So I'm terribly sorry, I missed the first part, but I did catch the one on fly tipping and camera. So if I can cover that off first. We work really closely with our public spaces team and the flight and fly tipping. So they do, and we've currently got some cameras up already. Where there are areas in the borough where there's persistent fly tipping, we do put the cameras in. We've had some successes with that as well, where we've taken enforcement action. We've captured individuals who have committed the fly tip. In some instances, we've had vehicles, but they've had their registration plates covered. So that means there's not very much that the camera can do because they can't get line of sight of the individuals themselves. In some cases, they see the camera that's there. I mentioned earlier that they're overt cameras. They've got signage to say there's a camera there, and people just go down the road. And if they want to fly tip, they'll just do it further down the road as well. So just to give you that reassurance that there is some really tight coordination between our public spaces team and our team when it comes to using mobile cameras to tackle fly tipping. That's done quite regularly. The first question, I'm sorry, Chair, I couldn't hear that very, very clearly. Was it around beds and mattresses?
The chest of drawers and the whole room was empty there, the whole room.
Did you catch that?
No,
Kieran, I think it was all part of the same
I don't think the
question.
price was left.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Installing the camera and the calling on VAT every time to, clear the rubbish.
So unless there are other questions, I have one, Kieran, if I may. Page 45, the PSPOs, remember we had a discussion last time about bringing in Morden and Wimbledon town centres within the scope of the PSPOs. And I think you had a concern that you didn't really have the standard of evidence that you would need to make that enforceable. But the areas are shown on the map. Can you just confirm that those two town centres are now covered by the PSPOs?
Sure. So we have continued to collect the data that we need to support evidentially the extension of the current PSPO. We also looked at the other areas that were mentioned at a previous meeting as well in Wimbledon. Unfortunately, and this is to do with lockdown and COVID, we haven't been able to get the level of evidence and data that we need to support the extension or putting in any new PSPOs across the borough. However, we are looking at that and monitoring that quite regularly, because now that lockdown has eased, things may change. So it's still, Chair, something that's on the table for us. As soon as we've got the level of evidence that we need, we will absolutely, in the first instance, look at extending the current PSPO to cover those town centres. So it's continuously under review. And as I said, now that lockdown's eased, we've got a particular group that looks at the PSPO. We capture all the information that we need. The flip side of it is that because we've got a quite proactive plan in place to enforce the PSPO or have some presence now that lockdown has eased. I've mentioned in the report around the rough sleepers and the work we're doing with public health around the street drinkers. Potentially the aim here really is to get to those groups who are street drinking and actually tackle them head on as well, individually or as a group, to dissipate the issue. The success of the PSPO would be that at the end of this period of time, we won't need it because we would have dealt with the street drinking. So yeah, we are continuously revising and reviewing those figures and that evidence. And as soon as we've got the evidence, obviously we'll be in touch with members and our lead member to let them know that yeah, we're ready to extend.
Good. Unless members have other questions, I will thank Kieran. I think also the cabinet member, Councillor Agagina, for joining us this evening. Agatha, you're happy, are you, with the?
I am. I'm sorry, I
Yep.
had another meeting, so I've been doing 2 meetings at the same time.
We're not hearing you, I'm afraid.
I said, I'm sorry, I had another meeting, so I've been doing 2 meetings at the same time. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
no, I'm happy with, I mean, we did discuss everything, so I'm happy with Kieran. Kieran's great. She knows her stuff. So I hope you all got the response you wanted. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Kieran, thank you very much indeed for your report. It's a slightly edgy time, isn't it? It's hard to read how coming back post-pandemic, how will the new normal be? It does feel a bit jittery to me, with rising incidence of ASB and so on. So I'm sure we'll be wanting to hear from you again as to how all this is playing out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Yeah.
Night, Kieran.
And our last item, on mental health on page 47. Everyone's got that? Yep. So I'm looking for Liz Hammond. There she is. Yes.
Good evening.
Liz, you got to give us a short introduction to this and then take questions.
Yes, I will do. Thank you for having me, and thank you for bringing this item to your meeting. So mental health has certainly been probably one of the biggest priorities that my team have supported Merton throughout the whole of the pandemic. When we did our large biannual staff survey, it was one of the highest deteriorating factors in the questions regarding people's feeling about their mental health. Also, conversely, our sickness figures are not supporting that, in the fact that there's been no change in the overall numbers of days taken due to mental health illness, absence from work. Overall sickness has dropped considerably since the pandemic started, but also stress and anxiety are also one of the highest reasons why somebody might visit and call our EAP provider. So there's a multitude of support that we've put in place. We've got 2 dedicated resources now. We've put in place 129 training courses. Over 1,300 people have been trained. 15 new courses, predominantly purely as a result of COVID. We've put in place a mental health policy and guidance. There's numerous wellbeing initiatives that we put in place. We've had a healthy market workplace, managing Zoom fatigue, anti-racism training, mental health kindness week, wellbeing Wednesdays, financial Fridays, singing from home Mondays, anything that we can do really to try and boost people's morale during this period. We've done the big staff engagement survey. We've done 2 pulse surveys related to health and wellbeing. We've trained up 34 mental health first aiders in the organisation. We have every Monday, first Monday of the month is the specific day that's devoted to mental health. We have additional support in terms of EAP, Able Futures, occupational health, good thinking. We have our flu clinics every year. We're just about to start the round of flu clinics again. We've reviewed our appraisal so that we include managers have to speak about how they're supporting their staff from a physical and mental wellbeing perspective. We've revamped our induction to include mental health and general wellbeing. Our current priorities at the moment, all managers are going to be trained in mental health awareness. We've got a wellbeing communication area on the hub. We're putting in place wellbeing champions. We've also got support for our smart working, our hybrid working, so people now starting to come back to the office. So sessions on how to return to the office, for managers leading hybrid teams, masterclasses for staff in working in a hybrid model, supporting the digital adoption of people managing Teams and Zoom and Skype and all the other technology that we have. And engagement sessions with smart working, with the smart working model. We're working towards a wellbeing commitment strategy, and we're also looking to get the London Healthy Workplace Award. There's 3 levels to that, and obviously we'll work towards excellence. So those are some of the numerous things that we have put in place to support our staff through mental health and wellbeing. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report here. Just wondering, particularly on the staff surveys themselves, I know from asking people myself, and it seems obvious that people on the front line in council services will be higher at risk from maybe suffering from worse mental health or more anxiety as everyone is during these COVID times. Just wondering if there are any indications of certain groups or certain teams within the council's staff that are suffering higher levels of lower mental health or anxiety?
No, not specifically. I mean, I think our frontline workers are generally pretty resilient anyway in terms of the type of frontline work that they do and the reaction invariably of the public to them. So no, we haven't got any specific pockets of people that I would say are more adversely affected than others. I think the majority from the pulse surveys that we've done, I think the majority of the anxiety and health and well-being is probably more COVID related rather than it is work generally related, if you see what I mean. I think working from home actually has got very good press from our staff. It seems to have gone down very well and a lot of our staff really like it. So in terms of them managing what might be a more isolating circumstance and workplace for them because they're working at home and they're not maybe engaging with people as much as possible. So we've done a lot of work with managers in how to keep them motivated and how to engage with their staff in a remote way. I think the general issues around the pandemic have been probably more impactful on stress and anxiety.
Thank you very much for your report and all the work you've been doing over the pandemic, which you highlighted to us all today. One of the questions I had was whether the numbers that we're seeing on mental health, so I think on the EAP helpline received 154 calls and there was a 50% referral, whether this is then being tracked, let's say in 3 or 6 months time to see whether these people that have had these referrals or that they're trying to kind of improve their mental health, whether we're actually seeing a decline in those people that are potentially suffering or whether that's pretty steady over the 12 months, and if so, what more can we do to reduce that?
Okay, so from an occupational health referral, yes, absolutely, we can track it. From an EAP perspective, that is entirely confidential. So we only ever get given the high level numbers. We don't get told Joe Bloggs has gone to EAP and has raised, you know, mental health or stress as an issue. We're not privy to that information because the EAP is a confidential service.
Liz, can I ask you a question about the pages 58, 59, the number of training sessions you've been running, which are huge, and against the number who book, the number who actually then participate is pretty low. I mean, is there a cost to this? Are you bringing in external trainers to run these courses? And why is it that people book and then don't show?
Okay, so there's a number of reasons for that. So in terms of cost, some of these are at no cost, and some of these are funded through the apprenticeship levy. So in that sense, we're already paying for the levy, so it's not an additional cost. Why do people, so there's instances where people have every good intention of attending. They might book 2 or 3 weeks in advance to do something, and you know, it just comes to the day and work commitments take over and they're unable to attend. We do see quite a lot of that happening, and the people that do attend speak very, very highly of all the courses, and I think word of mouth, and I think also there's maybe some reticence about people thinking that they need help or they need support or that they need to attend these types of courses. So what we try and encourage those that do attend to talk about it in a non-threatening way and a non-judgmental way, and to try and spread the word that way. But yes, we do get cancellations at the last minute, and unfortunately some of that is just due to pressures of work.
Other questions? No.
I got one question. Thanks,
Mansur,
Chair.
you have a
Thanks,
question?
Hammond. I first of all thank you for all what you're doing. I've got one question. I just need to know the rate of progress of mental health and well-being with the improvement of COVID situation in Martin. Thank you.
So I'm not quite sure I understand the question. I mean, obviously, as the situation, I think a lot of the mental health and stress issues throughout COVID were caused by people's social lives and family and friends being taken away from them. So obviously, now that we're out of lockdown and people are now free to mingle where they weren't previously, I think that is having a huge beneficial impact, and we would hope to see over time that gets reflected through the numbers. Also, we've just gone through the summer as well. People have started to be able to go on holiday, albeit it might be a staycation in the UK, but all these factors play to support people's mental health and well-being in a positive way, as opposed to isolation and lockdown is a very negative impact.
Thank you.
I think the one figure that really leaps out at me here is that the 92% who wish to continue working from home. I forget the qualification on that, but it certainly is here to stay, isn't it? And as yet, we are not taking a stance on that either way. If people want to work from home, they are allowed to do so. Will there come a point when, obviously for some groups, they need to be here, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. So we have.
How's that likely to play in the future?
We have sort of 5 principles, and the first principle is that the the needs of the customer come first. So if you are in a role that is frontline facing, or you're in a role where you need to spend part of your time in the office, now that lockdown has finished, there is a reasonable requirement for your manager to expect you to return to the office. That may be 5 days a week, 4 days a week, 3 days a week, once every 2 weeks. It could be any variation that is pertinent to your particular role. Then we've got staff who genuinely want to come back to the office because they haven't, maybe their home is not a conducive working environment. They can't work effectively at home because they're living in a small flat, or they're working from their bedroom because they're in a house share. And so there are people who genuinely need to come back for those reasons. There are also those that want to come back part of the time just for their own mental health and well-being, because they do see the social interaction that you get in an office environment as being supportive for them from a mental health and well-being perspective. So as much as possible, under the first principle of the service needs comes first, where we're trying to work individually with each staff member to as much meet their needs and their desires as the business needs, accepting of course that the business needs do override everything in that sense. I think one of the challenges is going to be to get a consistent approach to this across the organisation. Every job is going to be different, every job is going to be unique, and the requirements around those roles are going to be very different. However, where you've got a number of people doing the same role, it's very important that one person is not being given sort of different arrangements by their manager than somebody else. So it's important that we get some consistency from that perspective. But as much as possible, yes, those that really benefit and appreciate working from home and find that it really supports their home work-life balance, as much as possible, depending on the type of role they do, we want to be able to accommodate that.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I think if we can, Liz, we'll thank you for your presentation of the report and answering our questions. I think it's reassuring that you are very much on the case with monitoring the mental health of staff and just taking them through the re-entry to the workplace, re-entry to the council chamber, for example. Will the technology work? Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. And of course, we do have to remember some of these staff have been at work for 18 months, or some of the staff have not entered the office premises for 18 months. So that's quite trepidatious for some of them. But yes, we're supporting them all we can. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I think the last thing we have now is just the work programme. Our next meeting is not till November, is that right, Rosie? Yeah. We will start to look at the budget. And we're also looking at the council's comms service for that, and getting a presentation on your Merton, although that won't be the first by any means, will it? There is to be a presentation on your Merton around the end of this month. Yeah. Okay. Unless there are any comments on that. Oh,
we're holding the executive to account on these various categories, and then we bring in an officer every time. Why don't we hold the executive to account and actually ask the executive member to answer our questions? Sorry, you're waiting for me to turn it off.
For that, the cabinet member for each portfolio is invited to each meeting.
And they're sometimes lurking in the meeting, I realise, at the end of the meeting. But our focus should surely be on the cabinet member and their brief and how they are giving the lead on their brief. It shouldn't just be on the officers.
Well, you make it very.
I think really, if our questions are to do with the nitty gritty, it is, I think, realistic that officers take those. If it is touching upon policy, for example, if there is an administration view on staff coming back to work and the extent to which they should be, it would be nice to have the administration's perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's more than that, I think. Well, it's also like today, I was asking about how we define success. Billy was as well. Well, really, I'm asking the wrong person because she is defined by that criteria. And I think it needs, what is the strategy being put at the top? I think we need to ask the cabinet, how are you leading on this? It's on this big strategic thing. You're right, not on the detail always. I don't think we do enough of that as a committee.
I agree with Councillor Kohler, but of course their opportunity is to ask questions. I certainly know on the Sustainable Communities scrutiny panel, when I was on that, we used to probe the cabinet member quite often, and we did deflect straight away and go straight to the cabinet member. I think that's a very, very important. Can you hear me now? Oh, you can't. Oh, right. Okay. So, okay, right. So I think it's a very, very important point, and it's something we could have asked the cabinet member tonight. They're all there, but I do think as a committee we should be asking the political questions and asking the executive members, the cabinet members, who ultimately are responsible. And that I think Councillor Kohler is spot on. I think we should absolutely be focusing on the cabinet members as well as the officers. I guess what Councillor Kohler is probably alluding to is I think we probably have to bring the cabinet members out from behind the officers and stand up for the decisions that they have been making as an executive.
I think most of the scrutiny meetings that I've been involved with have the relevant cabinet member in attendance. And as Councillor McLean was saying, I've been on many committees where we've taken the opportunity to ask questions. Agree with Councillor Kohler's point, maybe we should do it more in meetings. I think in full council we do that, especially we have that as well. I'm just saying it's maybe not as missing as you'd said at the beginning there. Maybe I agree with many of your points there.
I think full council is theatre though, and here it's actually trying to get to some important information. And yeah, as a
I think it's just keeping that balance. I mean, scrutiny is valuable insofar as it is constructive, and I'm very anxious to keep it that way. And I think we're grown-ups. It ought to be possible to have an intelligent discussion with the cabinet member without it degenerating into a sort of political tussle, and we should try to do that. Yeah. I've got Peter McCabe. Peter, come in.
Chair, I'd like to move that we note the work programme, and there is absolutely nothing stopping members from asking questions of cabinet members. I was aware that Agatha was in the meeting, and there's nothing to stop any of us from saying to her, well, what are you doing? Or what's your view on this? And I'm not sure that this is on the agenda at the moment, but members can ask their questions. And of course, it's for you as chair to invite cabinet members where you think it's appropriate, and then members have that opportunity. So I think we should note the work programme and close the meeting.
We will make sure that cabinet members do answer, and but we do it in a way that is respectful and trying to get to a constructive dialogue.
Some meetings.
Can I speak, Peter? Can I say that I did invite myself to the meeting? It wasn't a thing that I was asked to come. So, I just think it's good for us to be there. But I know basically it's for the staff to, the officers to answer questions. So, but I was here because I want you to know what was happening.
Agatha, we can't hear you yet. Come on, try harder.
Sorry, I said I did invite myself to the meeting. It wasn't something I was invited. I just felt I should be there. But normally scrutiny is for the officers to actually answer all the questions. So I don't mind if I was asked a question, I would have answered it. But it's not a thing that I thought scrutiny was basically for them to be explaining what was going on. You can answer questions, but if you want the nitty-gritty of what's going on, they will tell you. So I don't think it's a problem, but it's not a thing for people to make up. We have to ask, officer cabinet members, like the cabinet members are refusing to answer questions. Okay.
Let's come to a close. Thank you all. I'm glad we persisted here in the council chamber. I will write to the borough commander telling her how much we appreciated her coming in person. I'm very glad she did, because she has, after all, got to answer to 4 different boroughs. So quite a stretch for her. Yeah, it's good. Okay, thank you.